You're listening to episode 203 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the official podcast of the Secular Buddhist Association, a grassroots-driven effort to answer the needs of secular teaching and practice for contemporary society. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the SBA website has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Meditation teacher and author Jason Siff joins us again to speak about some of his reflections on secular Buddhism. If there's one thing we've tried to avoid doing in the Secular Buddhist Association, it's to define the dogma of secular Buddhism with capital letters. We've intentionally kept our guiding principles at a very high level, as a certain hypothesis has shown to be true, that there are many kinds of secular approaches to Buddhism. There is no one and only one right way to do it. Secular Buddhism is a big tent, and whether your focus is on the suttas, or science, or the practice of meditation, there is an open exploration of what this means to you, here and now. Jason Siff, a Buddhist monk in Sri Lanka in the late 1980s, has been teaching meditation in the United States since 1990. He is the founding teacher of the Skillful Meditation Project in Los Angeles, and he will teach Awareness of Thinking at Berry Center for Buddhist Studies, August 13th through 17th in 2014. So, sit back, relax, and have a nice white ginseng tea. Our guest today is Jason Siff. Jason, welcome back. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Ted. Good to be here.
So we're going to be talking about some reflections on secular Buddhism. You and I were part of a group that got together at Berry Center for Buddhist Studies to discuss this topic last year in 2013. And I wanted to give a chance for you to talk a bit about this based on an article you wrote for Insight Journal for Berry Center for Buddhist Studies that came out in June of 2014. So let's dip into those waters by talking about how you define secular Buddhism, if we can even use the word define.
Well, in the article, I basically say that I've been teaching meditation and Dharma teaching as well for 25 years, and then basically found myself under the umbrella of secular Buddhism, not knowing exactly how I got there, but once I found myself there and people identifying me in my work within that context, it started to really occur to me that some of the key features of what I have been teaching are also very similar to what is being brought out in secular Buddhism. Though I don't agree with all of the points that are often presented around secular Buddhism, I do look at it more as a development of one's own discernment around various teachings. It's looking at the various views and beliefs we've taken on and practices, and look at the practices we've been doing, and reflecting on that and incorporating that within our own practice so that we start to see that we can question traditional ideas around things and look at our own personal experience and have some internal process and also external process with other teachers and people engaged in practice, where we find that our exploration of the Dharma, our development in our own meditation practice grows. And it often grows along the lines, I believe, that as the Buddha was talking about, but it doesn't grow in a straight line or fit necessarily in with traditional stages, but rather is something that's occurring within the individual in their engagement with the Dharma. And so that's one way that I see a connection with secular Buddhism.
Now, there's another connection too, and that has to do with your own recollective awareness meditation. How do you see that fitting in with a secular Buddhist approach?
Yeah, I think it fits in actually very well in many regards because recollective awareness meditation from the very beginning was based on a person's own subjective experience within meditation. It was a way for people to sit and meditate and recollect on their experiences and learn more about their mind in meditation. And for me as a teacher and teachers I've trained to work with them on their own direction in meditation practice. So it's not imposing some kind of external system or even a necessary external set of instructions onto a meditator and saying, do this. Instead, it's listening to a person's experiences and helping them navigate through those experiences and develop, a meditation practice that is very open, much more accepting, and is definitely their own path. It doesn't necessarily match entirely or, fit exactly with another person's path. And so I see this as, say, a person, centered type of meditation, something that, fits in with certain values that we share and, our history or culture of humanism, more authenticity, self-honesty, a capacity for an individual to develop internal qualities that will lead them onward instead of feeling like they always have to conform to some kind of system.
Yeah, and I think that's a wonderful way to understand that we are a diverse populace of practitioners, and what is most effective and helpful to one person may not be as beneficial to another. Can we explore that a little bit more in how that works with recollective awareness? We're also refreshing some of the listeners on what that practice does.
Well, simply with recollective awareness practice, people would just start a meditation sitting, with a simple instruction to be aware of their body, sit, touch with their hands, and allowing thoughts and feelings to go on in their meditation. And I believe that creates enough of a foundation for somebody to sit with thoughts and emotions during meditation. And people who already have a meditation practice can do their previous meditation practice and always choose to follow these other instructions that I give. And what starts to happen in this process, especially with people who already have a meditation practice, is they see their meditation practice from a whole nother angle. They're no longer behind it, embedded in it, doing it. They're starting to see it from a more passive, receptive place where they're noticing the various habits of mind that have gone into that practice. And I believe that that will have a positive effect on somebody's meditation practice. In the sense, you become your own teacher in that regard and notice some of the things that have gone on and perhaps find ways in which you can now work with something that has been troubling you in your practice for a long time. And for many meditators, what's been troubling them often is that they may feel pressured and tense when they meditate or feel inadequate or that they've been doing it wrong. And so you can actually start to look at that, and hopefully some of that will die down in this kind of practice.
So tell us a little bit more about how you see a secular Buddhist perspective add or sometimes hinder someone's study and meditation practice.
I think it adds in many respects, as long as from the vantage point I'm talking from, is that it you're able to bring in your own knowledge. In a sense, you're able to start meditating and looking at your experience with your own background, your own areas of study, which I think we're going to do instead of trying to adopt Abhidharma or some other, system of looking at one's experience. I think where it may hinder is, well, it's hard for me to say because I don't think it necessarily hinders in meditation practice. I think what I've noticed with secular Buddhists who I've worked with or people who are strongly aligned with it is that various aspects of the Dharma, various teachings may not necessarily be explored within their meditation practice over time. That what can tend to happen is say if someone really doesn't believe in rebirth or karma and connection to rebirth, that they might not, in a sense, let themselves explore that, consider those ideas, look at those teachings as found in the early Buddhist suttas, and try to, wonder, well, what would it be like if that were the case? I don't think the Buddha was necessarily asking people to take that on as a definite fact or law. I think he was really asking people, well, explore some of these questions that will come up with a meditation practice or a spiritual practice that is going to open your mind to a wider range of experience than you normally have. And once that happens, you do start to think about things that normally you wouldn't think about. So why not explore those ideas? And I think sometimes what happens with a very strong, scientific or materialistic orientation is that somebody may actually not want to take the risk to think about, strange things.
Yeah, and the way I think about this a little bit is we have the same problem with the tradition, using the tradition as an excuse to be dismissive of scientific findings. I think that problem that you're describing is valid. There's certainly the potential for us to use our own view to dismiss other ideas, which may have some valuable things in there. I see this on the traditional part as well. I see a great dismissive use with the word scientism without really caring about some of the progress and learning that can be made from this that was simply not available in Gautama's time. So I see that as not unique to secular Buddhism. At the same time, maybe looking at this with something that we're not as ideologically attached to as an example for all of us, whether we're on a more traditional side or a more secular side, is if we take, say, the Uncle Remus stories or Aesop's fables or something that has a message to learn, we sometimes get too bunched up in rejecting the idea of talking animals and therefore everything else in this story is useless, instead of looking at it in the way that we might learn something by, as you're saying, Jason, bringing this into our minds as a, well, what if? What is that feeling tone? What would that be like? And exploring, is there something of value in our lives that we can use as a behavioral or attitudinal adjustment or avenue that we can explore we haven't before? And I think a lot of traditions can offer that without having to accept the animals talk to each other. We don't have to go that far.
Yes, I think you're making various points here that really have to do with how we're going to be oriented within our practice. And I don't think that's the steady state, that somebody may start off a meditation practice being very idealistic and wanting to learn all sorts of things from the tradition and take in those various views and teachings, and then at some point find themselves questioning it and struggling with those beliefs and reading more widely, having dialogues with people outside of that tradition, and find that they can really question those views, but they've questioned them from the standpoint of having already gone into them in a deep way. They're not just brushing them off as irrelevant. And I do, that fits in with my own history around meditation practice, and I believe others like Stephen Batchelor probably went through the same kind of thing. So when you're looking at it from that angle, the metaphysical views found in Buddhism may just be a way in which you kind of start to get located within the tradition, the culture, the worldview, and from there you start to question it. So yes, you have to kind of suspend disbelief, and there are talking animals, when you're doing that. There are devas,
There's certainly a monkey in my mind that's talking all the time. So, Jason, one thing I wanted to build on this a little bit is that, and you bring up a wonderful point, that regardless of where you are right now, practice tends to change over time. It's not always the same from the first time you sit or go to a center to the present time, whether it's 2 weeks later or 20 years later. It can be very different and go through a lot of changes during that. And that's one reason we tend to encourage an open exploration of whatever that is and finding what's of value and not always what's easy, because sometimes what's of value is very difficult. And not to have the spiritual smorgasbord and where you only pick the desserts that you like, but you actually do eat the good things for you as well. One of the things I wanted to talk with you a bit about is I'm going to read a quote. It's a few sentences long that is from this article in Insight Journal. And it's talking a little bit about your approach to teaching. And you say, each individual will discover what is of value in the Buddha's teaching. And if that happens to disagree with what I consider profound, sacred, and true, it is not my role to assert one view of the Buddha Dharma over another, but I do have the responsibility to educate others on my point of view and what I see as flaws in my view, and to respectfully and compassionately offer intelligent critiques of other points of view. I do believe that is the role of the teacher in a secular Buddhist context. It is not to present one's own personal view as the only right view. I really like that, and I think this is along the same lines of what we've been talking about here. I'm wondering if you could expand on that a bit.
I could expand on it a bit where I began the interview is I do see that we are looking at different views and what is a view that someone has? A view is essentially one kind of narrative, a particular way of telling a story about something. So whether it's telling a story about your personal life and how you got to be a certain way, or a story about how things come to be in the natural world, it still has a particular narrative quality to it. And my views are, of course, going to be subject to my personal history, my taste, my conditioning, my reading, my experiences, meditation. It's not going to necessarily be the same as yours, though at a certain level of talking about things, we may agree, but that agreement may just be on a point. It's not going to be a kind of like a total agreement. So what I'm really referring to around people developing greater discernment is to start to see some of the flaws perhaps in existing narratives and go through processes in practice where those are corrected. And I believe that that's what the Buddha was actually teaching. He was teaching not right view, but a way of what I call error correcting seeing, noticing, discerning things that are, minor faults or flaws or that are inconsistencies or problematic elements within your point of view and starting to correct that way. And I believe in the Dharma teachings, the largest corrective or the main thing that we use to correct is the teachings around dependent arising.
Yeah, talk a little bit more about that. We've just had our friend Linda Blanchard on to discuss her book on dependent arising, so that's fresh in people's minds. You have a particular view about how dependent arising has helped with that maybe corrective view on karma and rebirth. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? You mentioned that in the article.
So dependent arising is a very hard teaching to describe, or to subtle and very, very difficult to really go into. I think, even when you stay with the simple terms, when one thing arises, so does another, that nothing arises in isolation, conceptually, that's very easy to get, but that can extend to so many areas. So that what starts to happen, I believe, when you start to contemplate and look at your experience more in terms of dependent arising, is that you're actually not trying to look at impermanence or in a sense, no self. You're not necessarily trying to get things to stop. You're noticing, well, what actually arises? And if a self arises within a situation, that you start to notice how a self seems to appear and begin to understand that. But that self is not an isolated entity. It is connected to other things. So that instead of trying to teach a kind of doctrinaire point of view that, dependent arising has to fit in with various characteristics of Buddhist teaching, or even with the 12-link chain or any of the number of chains that are listed in the Pali Suttas, to see how it is in your own experience. That the point of the teaching, I believe, is to get beyond labeling, get beyond just generalizing and putting everything under one umbrella, and starting to go into fuller discussion and closer connection to what it is you're feeling, thinking, sensing, knowing.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I'd also like to mention that you are going to be teaching an awareness of thinking program at BCBS from August 13th and 17th. And this is in 2014 for folks listening to this. Can you tell us a little bit about that as well?
Well, it's based on my upcoming book, Thoughts Are Not the Enemy. And essentially, what I'm going to be doing is just leading a meditation retreat as I normally would, with periods of talking about ways in which we can become aware of our thinking. And being aware of thinking includes awareness of emotions and also drifting off into sleep-like states. And to start to, how do you say, for people to feel that they can more honestly, write about and talk about their meditation experience, to look at things in more detail, to get a better feel of what one's meditation practice has become, and that thinking is an important part of our experience, and that if we don't develop a way of relating to our thoughts that actually opens up to greater discernment and understanding, we're going to find that we're going to be meditating for years and years, probably trying to stop certain thoughts or not let certain thoughts get a hold of us while we let other thoughts go on. But we haven't really gotten around to that real question: is how do I know my mind in meditation? How do I know it fully? And to do that, you really do need to allow thinking to go on.
I got to say, this is one of the things that I really enjoy about our conversations and the way you approach the teaching is we do have a very great diversity of ideas that sit with us when we meditate. And I find that dismissing those because we have an ideological attachment is maybe not the best way to help people on the path.
No, it's actually not. You end up with people just trying to prove the teacher's right or the tradition's right, and not paying much attention to what they actually think. Like I said at the conference, to a few people, I think that secular Buddhism has, if it brings in traditional meditation practices, it's bringing in traditional unexamined views and concepts.
And it does, and that's what is frequently a misunderstanding that is one of our biggest challenges. As for those of us who do say, yeah, a secular Buddhism is probably the best way to, at a high level, give folks an idea of what my practice is. But that is, to many of us, a very big tent with a wide variety of practices that in no way precludes lighting incense, which I do when I sit, or ringing bells, or doing whatever particular things that are contributive to your practice.
Well, that's it. That orients you into your practice. You take that away, and what does the person have? And so what I do when I teach is, in a sense, I in some way may help some people wean themselves off of certain things that are just getting in the way. But if it's significant for them, then I shouldn't drop it. It should. It's still working.
Right, and that's always, as a teacher, that's always something of a challenge in understanding that, yes, this is something that at this time is very helpful and needs to continue, versus, no, this is actively harming their progress or inhibiting it. And I suspect that might be something that your use of journaling helps you understand that a little bit better with each student.
It does. And it helps the student understand it for themselves, because when they journal their experience more thoroughly, they see all these things. It's building up awareness, and then they're bringing that heightened awareness about their practice to me, and we're able to talk about it.
I'm wondering if you also run into students who begin the practice, or maybe they've been engaged with meditation for quite some time, who are still in that place of approaching meditation as the intent is to still thoughts. Do you run into that?
Oh yeah, quite often the intent is to still thoughts or transcend thoughts or have thoughts vanish. That there is usually in several meditation practices, some, lack of a better word, agenda to get the mind to divest itself of thinking. That's, I think, the paradigm, that we're operating under. And so even practices that may teach greater acceptance and allowing, or even say that there is no technique, that you can just let your mind go here and there still may be this message within the instructions that something about thinking not being right, or if you develop further, your mind will stop thinking. So not addressing the fact that you're going to be thinking, to address that, head on, that many people's meditation sittings are taken up with thoughts. Even most advanced meditators would still experience quite a few periods of thinking. So to really start a meditation practice where your relationship to your thinking becomes, it becomes something right there initially, that knowing that thinking is going to be part of your experience, and how to continue where it's not a problem, but where it may actually open up into areas of awareness of thinking. And awareness of thinking is not just thinking. You start to find that you can remember and reflect on and go into the various thoughts that you've had, even while you're meditating, and that it's a very rich area.
Yeah, there is a change in one's relationship to the thoughts. And I'm hoping that you will come back and speak with us about the book that you have that's coming, and that one's called Thoughts Are Not the Enemy, an innovative approach to meditation practice. And when is that going to be coming out?
It should be mid-October.
Excellent. Well, I hope to bring you back and speak with us about that. And Jason, is there anything else you'd like to talk about?
I think this is about it. I greatly appreciate your questions and opportunity to speak with you.
Very glad to have you here. And for folks listening, you can find out more about Jason and his work on the site skillfulmeditation.org, which of course I'll be linking on the episode page for this episode. Jason, thanks for being here.
You're welcome, Ted.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the SBA website at secularbuddhism.org, and you'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. Discussion about this episode can be found on the episode page itself, along with show notes. The music for The Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizen Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monte Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are also linked on the SBA site on the About Podcast Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.